She had just held a newborn that wasn't breathing and brought him back. 12 minutes, steady hands, steady voice. 40 minutes later, she was sitting in her car in her own driveway, engine off, completely unable to make her hand move towards the door handle. Because her daughter hadn't texted back in 6 hours. Not, we need to talk, nothing. Just silence, sitting on the phone, and a woman who had spent her entire career being calmest person in any room that mattered. Here's what makes the story worth telling. The woman who could resuscitate a dying infant without her pulse changing could not sit with 6 hours of her own daughter's quiet. And by the time she walked through her front door, she had already sent 4 more texts, each one a little more careful, a little more desperate than the last. This isn't a story about being a bad mother or a needy person or too much. This is a story about what happens when a nervous system that's brilliant under one kind of pressure completely comes apart under another. I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened inside her body in that driveway and the tool that finally gave her hands somewhere else to go. Get comfortable for this one. And somewhere in the next few minutes, I think you're going to recognize a version of yourself. Maybe not with a daughter, but with a friend, a partner, someone who just went quiet on you once and it undid something in your chest. When you feel that moment, just leave a comment with the word same. I read everyone. Her name was Renee, 22 years in labor and delivery. Other nurses called into the room when things went sideways because Renee didn't flinch, didn't spiral, didn't need a minute to collect herself. She collected everyone else. You already know someone like Renee. Maybe you are someone like Renee. You've been the calm one before. You held a room together while your own hands were shaking underneath the surface where nobody could see. And some part of you has quietly wondered whether that's a gift or whether that's just a very well-practiced performance. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. The same nervous system that lets you stay steady in an emergency at work is not automatically steady everywhere else. In fact, the more your body learns to override its own alarm at work, the louder that alarm sometimes gets the moment you're finally safe enough to feel it. Renee's daughter, Ava, was 19, away at school for the first time, and most of that first semester, things have been fine. Text a few times a week, call on Sundays. But 3 weeks before the story, they had a disagreement. Small by most standards. The kind of thing that happens between a mother and a daughter learning how to be separate adults instead of one household. And after that disagreement, Ava's replies got shorter, then slower, and that Tuesday, nothing. Not a read receipt, not a delayed reply, just quiet. I want you to notice something as you listen to this. Is there a person in your life right now whose silence you're tracking a little too closely? You don't have to answer that out loud. Just notice. That noticing is doing more than you think. By the time Renee finished her shift that day, she had checked her phone 134 times. She counted later with kind of disbelief in her own voice. And I imagine some part of you already knows exactly what that number feels like from the inside. The phone face up on the counter, the way your whole body orients towards it like a compass needle. Here's what's actually happening underneath that behavior, and I want to walk you through it slowly because it matters. The moment Ava's silence stretched past what felt tolerable, Renee's neuroception, the term Dr. Stephen Porges uses for your body's unconscious scan for danger, read that quiet as a threat. Not a delayed reply from a busy college freshman, a threat. The same category alarm her body would sound for an actual emergency. And because that alarm sounded, blood constricted away from her prefrontal cortex, the same cortical shunting pipeline that shows up in every red zone activation, and redirected into parts of her body built for urgent action. There was no clear task for those urgently activated hands. So her body did the only thing it knew how to do with a surge of activation. It reached, it texted, it reached again. This is a seeker pattern, a specific sensory archetype that responds to silence not by withdrawing, but by chasing reassurance until the nervous system finally gets a signal that says the connection is still intact. And here's the part that I think you already feel somewhere in your body, even if you never said it out loud. As you start to recognize this pattern in yourself, you'll notice it was never really about the phone. It was about a body that learned a long time ago that silence from someone you love could mean something was being taken from you, and that the only way to feel safe again was to close that gap as fast as humanly possible. Renee sat in her driveway that evening constructing an entire narrative. She's mad at me. I said the wrong thing. I'm losing her. And none of it was confirmed. None of it was even likely if she'd been able to think clearly. But she couldn't think clearly because the part of her brain responsible for clear thinking had already been shunted offline by an alarm that fired before she had any say in the matter. This is somatic amnesia, mistaking the story your mind builds under activation for the actual truth of what's happening. The thoughts Renee was having in that driveway was not analysis. They were a physiological hallucination dressed up as insight. If you've ever mistaken a racing heart for a real emergency that wasn't actually happening, this is exactly the channel for understanding why. Subscribe, because we go even deeper into the secret pattern specifically in a few weeks. When Renee and I worked through this afterward, we didn't start with Ava. We didn't start with what she should text or what she should say or how to have the conversation. We started with her hands. Because here's something true about you. Whether you're a nurse or not, your body already knows how to come back to steady ground. It has done it before, many times than you even give it credit for. And some part of you, even in the middle of the chase, is capable of noticing that chase itself feels terrible, which means some part of you is already looking for a way out of it. We used a version of what I call the bilateral cognitive crossing, the same tool built for exactly this kind of distancing activation. Arms crossed over the chest, hands resting on opposite shoulder. A slow alternate tapping. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. Engaging both hemispheres of the brain at once, interrupting the kind of repetitive spin that chasing behavior is on. And as you cross your own arms right now, just feel what I'm describing. As you notice that slow, alternating rhythm, you might find that something in your chest loosens just slightly, even before you fully understand why. You don't have to force that. You don't have to make it happen. It's simply what tends to happen when both sides of the brain finally get to work together again, instead of running the same loop and repeat. For Renee, the shift wasn't dramatic, it was quiet. Her hands, which had spent the last hour reaching for her phone, finally had somewhere else to go. Onto her own shoulders, into a rhythm, into her own body instead of into someone else's silence. And in that small, steady rhythm, something in her finally exhaled. She didn't send a fifth text. She sat with that tapping for a few minutes. And when she finally walked inside, she wasn't calm because she'd fixed anything with Ava. She was calm because her own nervous system had to come back online long enough to remember that a slow reply from a 19-year-old in the middle of her own life was not evidence of anything except exactly that. A slow reply from a 19-year-old in the middle of her own life. Ava texted back 2 hours later. She'd been at a study group with her phone on silent. That was it. That was the entire emergency. Here's what I want you to take with you, and I want you to actually let this land instead of just nodding along. It's possible to be extraordinary under one kind of pressure and completely undone by another. And that doesn't make you inconsistent. It makes you human, running a nervous system that learns safety and danger in the very specific places at very specific times, long before you had any say in the matter. Maybe your version of Renee's story isn't a daughter at college. Maybe your version of Renee's story isn't a daughter at college. Maybe it's a friend who went quiet after a hard conversation, or an adult child, or someone you love who just needs space that has nothing to do with you at all. And whichever one it is, the biology underneath it is exactly the same. And the way back is exactly the same too. If you want to know whether your default under silence is to chase like Renee or to disappear like we talked about last week, the free relational nervous system quiz will tell you in about 5 minutes. It's linked below and pinned in the comments. Before you go, I'd love to know, when someone goes quiet on you, what's the very first thing your body does? Not your mind, your body. Tell me in the comments. That tells me exactly what to build for you next. Welcome to the regulation era, and I'll see you next time.